The morning sun was rising over Bubbles' shed, illuminating a scene of bustling, legitimate industry. Bubbles stood proudly amidst a complex network of shiny vats and pristine tubing. He had taken a massive leap of faith, selling his highly coveted pizza sauce recipe to a peculiar investor with a strange accent. Instead of wasting the money, Bubbles had wisely reinvested every single penny into building his very own microbrewery. It had started off slowly, but the dedication was finally bearing fruit. He held up a freshly sealed bottle, admiring the label. It was his signature Green Bastard India Pale Ale. He was selling a tremendous amount of it to the residents around the neighborhood. Business was truly booming. However, the booming business brought its own set of pressures. Today was the day of Ricky's heavily advertised major announcement, and Ricky had placed a staggering order for 22 cases of the beverage. Bubbles knew it must be incredibly monumental news for Ricky to require such a vast quantity of refreshments. He was working at a frantic pace, filled with a nervous, electric excitement. The door to the shed creaked open, and Julian strolled in, a forced smile plastered across his face. He greeted Bubbles warmly, asking how the beverage business was treating him. Bubbles beamed, wiping his brow with a clean cloth. He proudly declared that it was absolutely wonderful, a far more rewarding endeavor than any of their previous misguided schemes. People were genuinely enjoying the product, and that brought Bubbles an immense sense of pride. Julian leaned against a sturdy wooden barrel, his eyes calculating. He casually suggested that Bubbles should create a special edition drink bearing Julian's name and face, perhaps a protein-enhanced beverage targeted at fitness enthusiasts. Bubbles chuckled politely at the humor, but the atmosphere subtly shifted when Julian began probing into the financial specifics. He asked about the sales figures, fishing to see if Bubbles was turning a substantial profit. Bubbles immediately recognized the direction the conversation was taking. Now that the enterprise was generating legitimate income, Julian was suddenly exhibiting a keen interest in the operational details. Bubbles gently scolded him, urging Julian not to try and outsmart him with complicated business jargon. Bubbles watched all the same investment television programs. He knew exactly what Julian was attempting to do. The facade cracked, and Julian sighed, his broad shoulders slumping in defeat. He confessed that he was entirely destitute. He was trying his absolute best to live a legitimate, honest life, but he was finding the transition incredibly difficult. He recounted a profoundly humiliating experience from the previous evening. He had invited a lovely woman over for a cinematic viewing in his home, and because his pockets were so empty, she had been forced to purchase the microwavable popcorn herself. The embarrassment had been crushing. Bubbles looked at his oldest friend, his heart softening with a deep, abiding empathy. Julian's situation was dire if he could not even afford a simple evening snack. Without a second thought, Bubbles reached into his cash box and handed Julian a crisp bill. Julian initially resisted, his pride flaring, stating he did not want charity. But Bubbles insisted gently, reminding him that friends support each other in times of need. Their quiet moment was abruptly shattered by the dramatic entrance of Ricky. He burst into the shed, clutching his arm, complaining loudly about the neighborhood animals. Bubbles and Julian gasped. Ricky's arm and shoulder were covered in nasty scrapes and bandages. Julian instantly suspected Ricky's new romantic interest, Susan. He asked if the volatile woman had finally lost her temper. Ricky quickly defended her. He had been seeing Susan for several months, and he confessed that he had genuinely forgotten how wonderful it was to have someone to share his life with. She could be a handful, he admitted, but their connection was incredibly intense. In fact, it was so intense that he felt compelled to improve his physical fitness just to keep up with her energy. Bubbles listened, his feelings conflicted. Part of him was overjoyed that Ricky had found companionship. Ricky needed a positive, guiding presence in his life. But Susan intimidated Bubbles. She had a forceful personality, and Bubbles worried about the unseen influence she exerted over Ricky's fragile decision-making processes. Bringing the focus back to the immediate issue, Bubbles pointed at Ricky's battered state, demanding to know what had happened. Ricky launched into a convoluted, entirely unbelievable tale about taking Corey and Jacob out for an adventurous session of rollerblade skiing. He claimed they were gliding along beautifully until they struck a treacherous patch of gravel, resulting in a spectacular and painful crash. He added that Jacob had taken the worst of the tumble, blaming the very existence of gravel for their misfortune. Julian folded his arms, his expression flat. He questioned the logistical impossibility of rollerblade skiing, especially on rocky terrain, and demanded to know where they had even acquired the equipment. Ricky stumbled over his words, inventing a fictional retail establishment on the spot, but the lie was unraveling faster than he could spin it. Bubbles stepped closer, inspecting the wounds. He pointed out that the injuries looked suspiciously like the result of a chaotic scramble through a sharp, rocky ravine while fleeing a loud noise, not a sporting accident. Cornered by the undeniable truth and the piercing stares of his closest friends, Ricky finally broke. He slumped onto a stool, dropping his head into his hands. He confessed everything. He apologized profusely, admitting that he had been keeping a massive secret from them all summer long. He had not been upgrading his small engine repair certification, nor had he been attending the heavy machinery operation courses he had boasted about. He had secretly been cultivating a massive botanical project in the deep woods. Julian and Bubbles stared at him, a profound sense of disappointment settling over them. Ricky explained that he had partnered with a legitimate botanical expert to create a magnificent, towering garden. It was a masterpiece of irrigation and dedication. He was on the verge of a single, monumental transaction that would have secured his financial future forever. But the previous night, his dream had collapsed. Rivals had ambushed them, stolen his entire harvest, and chased them through the dangerous terrain. Bubbles was appalled. He could not believe Ricky had endangered Corey and his own son-in-law, Jacob, on such a foolish and risky endeavor. Ricky weakly attempted to shift the blame, stating that Jacob had volunteered, but Bubbles quickly dismantled that logic, reminding Ricky of his responsibility as the elder figure. Ricky, desperate to salvage his pride, declared that he was incredibly close to retiring from their chaotic lifestyle. He vowed to track down the culprits and exact his revenge. But Julian sternly shut him down. The project was gone. It was over. They needed to move forward. Julian, rubbing his temples, sighed deeply. He stated that he should have known Ricky's heavily promoted grand announcement was just a cover for another failed, illegal scheme. But Ricky's eyes widened with sudden, frantic energy. He fiercely denied Julian's accusation. He insisted that the grand announcement at the upcoming party had absolutely nothing to do with the ruined garden. The announcement, he claimed, was something entirely different, something tremendously positive and life-changing. Julian and Bubbles exchanged a skeptical glance, but Ricky remained adamant. The party was still happening, the massive beverage order was still required, and the news was going to be astonishing. Meanwhile, across town, the heavy metal doors of the county correctional facility swung open, releasing Mr. Leahy and his loyal companion, Randy, back into the world. The sunlight felt magnificent on their faces. Mr. Leahy took a deep breath of the fresh air, declaring his hatred for the despicable environment they had just left behind. They were starting from zero, but he found immense comfort in the fact that they were finally free and, most importantly, they had each other. The ordeal had brought them closer together, forging an unbreakable bond. Their peaceful moment of reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Officer Ted, a man whose uniform hid a deeply compromised moral compass. Ted approached them with a calculating smirk, fully aware of the power he held. He knew that Mr. Leahy and Randy possessed information that could ruin his career. Ted presented them with a heavy, sealed envelope. Inside was exactly $50,000. He explained that during their recent, massive encounter with the authorities, an enormous sum of money was supposed to be transferred to the Central Evidence Facility. Instead, Ted had redirected a portion of it to fund unauthorized upgrades for his local precinct. The envelope he handed them was hush money.